Thank you so much for coming today. Welcome, welcome. Well, thank you all for braving the cold weather and coming during when everybody's still scrambling to get ready for the holidays. It's great to have you all here at the Middle East Institute. My name is Stu Jones. I'm the president of Middle East Institute. I'm really honored and delighted to be here today with this truly distinguished panel. The Middle East Institute is especially grateful to be partnering with the General Catalyst Institute and CEO of GCI, Teresa Carlson. Really, we started talking about this event and this report with Teresa several months ago. And thanks for your leadership and your inspiration and your encouragement on this. This is, Mohammed will talk a little bit about our Tech in the Middle East program in a second, but you've really given us confidence and wind in our sails for this program. We're really deeply grateful. Also really grateful to have Soliman Ali here. Soliman is a serial entrepreneur, a startup expert, someone who's bringing AI to medical services in a really creative and novel way. And I'll let him explain it better than I can, but with real applications in the Gulf. So we've got a real mix of capability here. Mohammed, of course, we're very proud of Mohammed. He's the rare engineer who can actually do and analyze policy and look at where the ball is going in terms of how policy is being made, both in the United States and in the Gulf on tech. And then we have Teresa from General Catalyst, leading private venture firm, and her institute, and then Soliman. So thank you very much. Well, let me start then with you, Teresa. Could you just tell us about General Catalyst and GCI and how you fit into this? And I think the story of GCI in itself is intrinsically interesting. So please.
Well, first of all, let me thank you. I'll brag on you for a minute, Ambassador. You are a very well-respected individual across the Middle East, so humble and so knowledgeable, and you've done so much building this up. So thank you, and we are really delighted to be partnering with you here with the General Catalyst Institute. So, like the ambassador said, I run something called the General Catalyst Institute, and it's part of General Catalyst. And we are the third largest venture capital firm globally. And in fact, this amazing gentleman he's one of our founders, which we're very proud of. We have over 800 of these amazing individuals, and it's hard to choose because they all do great work, but not all in the Middle East. So I think that's interesting as we get into that conversation. But the General Catalyst Institute, Miriam and I here, who's our Chief Public Policy Officer, we launched this a year ago, September. And we launched it in the US, the UK, the EU, India, in the Middle East, the Gulf mainly. And we've been going around different places in the Gulf. We've been to the UAE, Saudi, and Bahrain, and Kuwait. So we launched it, and the goal of our work is to proactively and collaboratively work with governments around the world to help shape good policies for startups. I was at big tech for over 28 years, which I love my career. I'll talk about that a little bit as we discuss the Middle East. But what I don't think I recognized with all my work over the years was the fact that startups kind of don't have the same advantage when it comes to policies because nobody's out in front for them. We actually said we want to be front and center, make sure that we're bringing our startups to Capitol Hill, to the hills around the world. We were just in Brussels. We'll do work in the Middle East with them, but it's bring them to the lawmakers to actually let them see the work they're doing, have those conversations. And I will tell you, we do this as part of advocacy and thought leadership, and that's what we're doing here with the Middle East Institute. But we have had such great response around the world because they are so excited to see the transformational technology that these companies are creating, because they truly are the heartbeat of economies at every level. And we focus on these pillars of economy on finance, healthcare, defense, manufacturing, energy. So things that really that make a country resilient. So that's what the General Catalyst Institute's about. We've been around about a year, but we've actually made a lot of headway. So I'm really excited. And again, we're truly honored to have this partnership with the Middle East Institute.
Thank you very much. And Soliman, can you tell us about yourself and Cooper and it's great to have someone who's actually in this business directly working in the Gulf. So if you could just sort of put that in context for this audience.
Of course, team. I appreciate everyone coming in today. Exciting, again, for you guys putting together such a lively attended event. So background, my name is Soliman Ali. I'm co-founder and CEO of Cooper. I've been fortunate enough to be backed by General Catalyst and Teresa and her team. With their guidance, we've been able to build some of the most cutting edge product as it relates to care navigation. And the crux of what we do is we support patients from the moment they leave the hospital to anything that they need after. The idea behind this is to create a uniform patient experience that takes data and data context into practice. And so we're really excited about healthcare broadly as an industry and the intertwining between AI, healthcare, and software. We believe that to be a very high level, a high area of growth in the industry broadly, both in the US and abroad as well. So really excited to have this conversation and to what I believe will be the beginning of a really inspiring trend that we'll see broadly within AI. So
thank you. Thank you. And again, welcome to MEI. It's great to have you here for the first time. So today's panel, as you all know, is centered on a newly released report by Mohammed Soliman, our senior fellow here at MEI, the GCC AI Stack, a roadmap for Gulf leadership in the global technology race. We think this is the first really comprehensive effort to think seriously about what a GCC AI stack would look like. And we want to get into that. But Mohammed, first, can you just talk about what we're doing here at MEI so people have a little bit of context for that?
This might be the first time for me to introduce MEI next to the CEO of MEI. You know MEI, this is the oldest think tank in DC when it comes to Middle East. But for the past few years, we have been very much more focused on the new Middle East, or at least this is where I fit in. So we believe that there's a new Middle East, a Middle East that's much more defined by future thinking, much more focused on redefining the pillars of the political economy of this region. This is where technology fits in. That started, of course, with 5G. The Middle East was one of the few regions where you are seeing tensions around 5G deployment between the United States and China. You see this when Dubai and Doha were resilient cities during COVID-19. You have expats in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Dubai increased its own population by 30%. You see how the Saudi Arabia is playing a role in securing supply chain outside of China. We're working on space work. We're seeing where the UAE and Bahrain are heading when it comes to designing satellites. And of course, and more importantly, and why we're here today is our work on AI, our work on how the region is becoming a backbone for AI infrastructure, for compute capacity. So our programming here in MEI is more thematic. We're trying to figure out what exactly is happening in the Middle East. We're trying to tell audience in DC, we're trying to tell policymakers, there's new Middle East. Please adjust your policy. Please adjust your expectation. Try to change your own narrative about what's happening in the Middle East. So one day we don't really wake up and figure out that this new Middle East it left us behind. So this is the digest of what we're doing here, and we welcome all of you to be part of our own programming, our own events, and we're very happy that we're doing this partnership with GCI around the AI, the GCC AI Stack report.
So am I. So thank you very much. And so that's our introduction, and you can see a very distinguished panel, very knowledgeable. And in addition to the folks in this room, we have a bunch of people who are tuning in online. So I want to welcome that group as well. Thank you for joining us here at MEI. So Mohammed, I'll start with you. In this paper, you've introduced the concept of the GCC AI Stack. In practical terms, what does that mean from chips and energy to data centers and applications? And why does it matter now? Not just for the Gulf, but for global AI infrastructure.
I want to give a shout out to Kim Pollock at the end. He is our VP for policy. He edited this report at least 5 times, endless nights on Sundays and Saturdays. So thank you, Kim, for your work that you have done that, because I believe he is almost my co-author at this point.
And he told me he's very proud to know now all about AI. So
Yeah.
Exactly. So the main philosophy behind the GCC AI Stack is very simple. We're trying to make the AI conversation is much more about infrastructure, about compute infrastructure, rather than just about models. And the reason that this is the philosophy, because I believe that the constraint on AI deployment and scaling has moved from models to chips, and now it's energy. We have companies, without disclosing names, who have millions of chips in warehouses. Why is that? Because we do not have permits. We don't have enough electricity. Right now, we have almost 68, 70 gigawatt of compute capacity globally. Took us 20 years to take us there. And for us to keep building, for us to keep up with demand, we need anywhere between 200 gigawatt to 300 gigawatt. We have no electricity for that. Let alone we have no capital for that. Every gigawatt that you are seeing being deployed, we're speaking about $30 to $40 billion. That's a massive capital. So even if you are on the lowest end 200 gigawatt or on the highest end 300 gigawatt, you need a lot of energy and a lot of capital. And this is where the role of the Gulf collectively is coming into play. We're thinking about a region that's building their own AI infrastructure at scale, like 5 gigawatt OpenAI Stargate project in the UAE. Or the Saudis are thinking and committing to 3 gigawatt compute by 2028 or 2029. Even Qatar announced the Qatar AI company that's very much focused on infrastructure. So there's something happening in the Gulf around infrastructure. So the report is trying to add a framework about how this is actually almost constituting an energy abundant AI stack in the GCC that collectively making this region a very important compute hub that we need for all this compute demand coming from all emerging markets that we as the United States cannot really service because of latency, because of capital, because also our enterprise layer cannot really project that much power in, I would say, low income markets that you see in some parts of Asia and Africa.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Teresa, you mentioned your 29 years in the business, but really you were one of the pioneers who helped bring the cloud to the Middle East with your experience at AWS. When you look at today's AI moment in the Gulf, do you see similarities? Do you see differences? Are we at an inflection point now? How do you compare what you saw, when you were bringing AWS to Bahrain and how you see the landscape today?
Yeah. So in fact, just kind of for background, I built and led a business at Amazon Web Services called Worldwide Public Sector. And we went into the Middle East, it was 2013, and we ended up negotiating our first region in Bahrain. And they were actually a good starting point because Bahrain is a small country. The Crown Prince really had a vision. He understands where he sits in the position of the Gulf and said, we want to be a leader when it comes to actually driving cloud computing. So we built our first region there, and then we negotiated one in Saudi and one in the UAE. What I found, it was probably one of the most challenging yet rewarding things when I write my book in my career, because I learned a lot. I learned so much. And believe it or not, back then, even Amazon hadn't gone into the Middle East. It was very early. Nobody was they weren't even really thinking about doing business. You couldn't do Amazon, retail was not there. Like it was just really, really early days. And so I would say then the Gulf was a laggard for sure in cloud. And what Mohammed was saying, in order to make AI a reality, which you need cloud computing, we had to make sure we had LAN networking. We had to work with the telecommunications providers, which was a bit challenging because the pricing model was very different for cloud. They had to understand how they were going to make money off of this. They had a very governmental mindset around this stuff. So we tried to really help them understand this is a commercial model that you need to wrap your head around. This is going to help you build economic opportunity. So we spent a lot of time really working hand in hand, which I really enjoyed, because once they understood this, they got busy. We were able to work with them. But the regulatory side was a bit of a challenge. So we had to really also set up the right regulatory environment. The good news is once you have that sovereign make the decision about the regulatory environment, they move very, very fast. So I would say the net was they were laggards, but once we got in there, we got them moving. They are now leading in AI. So the big difference to me with the Gulf countries is they're leading. If you look at what the UAE did out of the gate, they literally set up these tenets and principles on how they were absolutely going to operate their country. They had the first minister of AI, which people were kind of, if you remember when they announced that, people were like, really? I mean, it was kind of and I remember meeting him and I thought, this is like such a great idea. They're way out in front on this. And now you've seen what the Saudis are doing. But I will share just one thing on data, because we were talking about data earlier. Bahrain did a policy when we set the cloud up there on data sovereignty. So basically, if you put your data in the cloud in Bahrain, it works like an embassy. It's like so countries that put data there I just saw that Saudi now is talking about their own data sovereignty. So they're each moving ahead, like they're trying to do something that's differentiated to make their country, you know, as they should be, a bit more special. But also I think we'll see them work together to make sure that the Gulf can be ahead overall.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thanks. So Salman, from the founder's perspective, what's the startup case for the GCC AI tech stack? I mean, why does having an integrated regional stack matter for building and scaling companies like yours?
Yeah, so ultimately for us, when you think about kind of any kind of product that you're bringing to market, really clarity on use case is very important. So like for in the healthcare arena, having the ability to impact the patient experience through and through is top of mind. So when you think about that stack, what's necessary for that foundational experience to exist, you have to have clarity in terms of the regulatory environment first and foremost. So like down to the local level, are we following the right area kind of rules and constraints, if you will. And then essentially as you progress, once the use cases nailed down, you think about the regulatory framework and then the operating side of things as well. So still going back to some of the work Teresa has done in terms of pricing, availability, accessibility, those things combined with these different elements of the regulatory clarity allows a builder, for example, to have confidence that, hey, I can kind of traverse these different environments and provide almost immediate impact without having to form fit and build different, like unique experiences for each different geography, if you will. So that can be sort of a constraint, but also in a way, once you have that foundational stack tight, then you can accelerate the process very quickly. And then almost it becomes like accessing a larger region and following a playbook, if you will. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just say on something he said is critically important? Just this is, you know, as we recommend things to the Gulf states, when you look at things that really slow down a region, even here in the US, you've heard us talking about the states all wanting to build out their own AI model, what's their regulatory system. And we've had a lot of our founders basically say, if they actually do that, we won't be able to work in that state. So they are, you know, so states are starting to say, oh, we're going to do this or that. And we want guardrails. But if we have a patchwork of regulatory environment, it really slows down innovation. And one of the recommendations, and then Europe, you see Europe, they have 27, even though they say they have an EU. We just had 10 founders in Brussels, and the big thing that they communicated to the European Commission was, if they're an energy company or a health company, they still have to go to every state, pass through every, you know, hurdle, and it costs a lot, and it really slows things down across the board. The Gulf states, you know, they do a good job cooperating. So this is a recommendation, listening to something like this on these key areas. If they can work in a regulatory environment that allows movement between the Gulf states, it will really help them overall just move faster. They'll all do okay, but if they really want to be ahead as an overall region, this is something that will just catapult their success.
Thank you. That's almost my second question for you.
Oh, sorry.
So that's great. So, so what you're saying is, you know, if this GCC tech stack is aligned with the U.S. and firms like yours and, you know, firms like GC are looking at that as a partner and a tool and a platform, you know, what is it you're looking, you know, what do you sort of need in that? So one obviously is not a patchwork of regulation and
That's right.
consistency across borders. What else are you looking for?
Well, the hardware has to be there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, back to, you've got to have the compute. You have these points that Mohammed was making on energy, which the Middle East is such an amazing place, right, to do this. It's like, it is they have a lot of land, they have a lot of energy capacity and capability. They have all the large tech providers already working with them, and they're really good at this. So so energy, they need the chips, which we've seen President Trump now kind of has opened up the export capabilities for them to be able to have these chips. I will say, one of the things that we've noticed with our founders, they want access to the latest and greatest capabilities quickly. So the Gulf states, the Middle East, having the latest and greatest chips. So I know they're negotiating that, right, with all of the large providers. And then the last thing is talent. Outside regulatory, we already talked about that. So, but talent, and I will say, I think they have another superpower. The one thing I've noticed is they're okay, and this has been a bit of a change. They're okay importing talent. They're actually, you know, U.S. now is kind of like trying to keep talent out a little bit. And the Gulf states are saying, we're here, come in, we're going to treat you well, we're open. So they're like, I think this could be a huge superpower. And we have a lot of founders that want to go there and set up shop. So that's the reason we're having this conversation. I think we can bring more of our founders in and help them set up a really good environment to build a business.
Those are great points. Thank you. Mohammed, so there's still significant resistance in the United States, and certain policy circles and certain voices are opposed to, U.S. Robust cooperation with the Gulf. And one of the reasons is there's concern about leakage of precious technologies to China. Your paper sort of turns that idea on its head by suggesting that a GCC AI tech stack could actually be an extension of the U.S. system and give our technologies scale that are hard to that we're having trouble creating here in the United States. Is that what you meant to say? And can you elaborate on that a little bit?
That's a very excellent question. So let me start from the 30,000 feet level. So in the paper where I'm trying to reframe the conversation around compute rather than chips. I think chips is very reductive. So I'm trying to rethink about the question of competition. What exactly are we competing over? The reason why it's compute, because it's much more easier framework to think about AI. Compute, that way to define it, is chips, it's data center, and energy. Those three components. Based on numbers, United States has almost 76% of global compute. Either GPUs, is it compute capacity by gigawatts, whatever. And China has about 15%, and the rest has, give or take, 10%. That's as it stands today, given the current scale of chips production, where China is when it comes to its own indigenous chips capabilities. If you're someone like me, who is a boring engineer, who does not really believe that AI will be a god or be a monster or or don't treat AI as a uranium, for me, compute means productivity. You deploy it at scale. You're able to squeeze those models. You're able to get your own results, optimized results from this sort of compute. So you don't really see any sort of monsters coming your way in the next 2 or 3 years. There is a case to be made that China is able to scale up its own capacity and will be able to come up with certain solutions that good enough. It doesn't mean that this is going to be the latest NVIDIA Blackwell. So what does it mean? It means we have only limited time to lock in the partners that we need to help us with our own scale problem. We have a scale problem. That's a piece I wrote. I still stand by it. This country cannot produce anything at scale. That's the biggest problem that we have in America right now. There is a reason why we lost the solar panel competition with China. There's a reason why EVs are coming out of China. I lived in Mexico City. I drove one of those BYDs in Mexico City. Extremely impressive, very cheap. Those are products coming out of China were a result of overcapacity by design. And I think that this playbook is going to be there to be deployed when it comes to chips. So if you have that sort of buffer, you need to look for certain countries that you think are good for our own AI ecosystem that will help us with our own scale problem. Which regions that we believe are fitting that sort of bill? I would say that this is the Gulf states. They have the energy, they have the land, like Teresa said, and the capital, of course. And let's talk specifics. For us to keep up with this sort of compute demand with China, we need anywhere between 200 and 300 gigawatt, as I said. We do not have that capacity. China is able to add the entire electricity grid of the United States every single year. We're not able to get any of these sort of electricity supply in time because we don't have the permits. We have a big problem when it comes to state rights. We have a big problem when it comes to federal government. That's a constraint that's not going to be solvable anytime soon. So where the Gulf is in this ecosystem, this is a region that's already made a commitment, is already within the United States security umbrella. 90% of their own platforms are American. You have US forces, almost 55,000 forces deployed in the Arabian Gulf for all sorts of reasons. More than 60% of their own capital is already inside the United States. So pick and choose your favorite AI lab, your favorite company, and you will see a sovereign Gulf fund that is part of the main investors. So they're already part of the ecosystem. When it comes to compute, it's even much more simpler way. Those are American companies deploying compute and running compute from the Gulf. So Stargate, this is an OpenAI initiative. When it comes to Saudi Arabia Humane, it is AWS. When it comes to other partnerships, you see AWS, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, Grok. Those are American companies that are making the Gulf much more technically, not only technically aligned, but commercially relevant to our own compute capacity. So the short answer, I think at this point, they are part of our own tech stack. It's just the way, how can you integrate them more and make sure that we have a policy roadmap for that sort of integration.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Soliman, so as the Gulf builds out that full AI stack, how does this change what's technically and commercially possible for healthcare AI? Where do you see the region creating advantages that don't exist in other places?
Yeah, so when you think of like a self-contained stack, end-to-end experience, you create an opportunity for a lot of these healthcare organizations like myself and other kind of high-growth companies to have absolute security and control on that data. And that becomes really, really critical as you progress and develop better fidelity of product. And so when you think about this design, it's almost purpose-built for the region. And what we've seen as an analog in the US is a lot of the applied AI use cases that fuel a lot of these companies on the foundation model side have been a product of identified themes that are strong, that are pulling the market in. So if you look at adoption of healthcare applied AI in the US economy, it's incredible across the board through and through. And I see the same parallel as an opportunity in the broader GCC region. And so I would say if you have a self-contained ecosystem, it makes the process of security and governance refined. So I'm not having to kind of repeat that process and apply it in different geographies. I can take that foundational stack that everyone aligns upon. It's like, hey, this is a robust framework that works. Let's say 80% of the process is completed, and there's 20% we can really dynamically customize as necessary across the regions. But the theoretical possibility of having this centralized takes away a lot of the work, which would be incredible because then you can really scale massively. And then do things that we do in the region that we haven't even yet done in the US because of a more free-flowing thought and intellectual perspective here, if you will. So,
thank you. Interesting. Teresa, let me. I saw you nodding at Mohammed. So how does the private sector view this US-China strategic competition issue, security, protecting US technology, but needing to grow and needing more scale? I mean, when you're talking to your companies and your colleagues, I mean, how are you framing that issue internally? Obviously, you don't want to see your tech go to China. On the other hand, we're not going to have AI at the scale you need to grow this industry. So how does the private sector look at that problem?
So I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but at GC, we don't invest in any companies in China. China's not, it doesn't play into our world day to day, if that makes sense. I kind of gave you the regions we're focused in on. And we are also big believers that our founders, what we're seeing and doing here in the US is so profound that we have a high level of confidence in what's happening in the US. And of course, we have to worry about China. The things that we think about more, if you consider resilience as a nation, how do we maintain our position? It's not about where we are, how do we maintain it? And we do need things. I mean, critical minerals are, like, we've not talked about critical minerals. Can any of you remember until this administration, us really having a serious conversation about critical minerals? Maybe you did, Ambassador. I don't remember in my career. And now, and even though behind tech people were kind of always talking about this, underlying in my 28 years of doing the work I've been doing, or maybe he's 29, I don't know, I'll take it down a few notches. But we knew you needed critical minerals to make things work, but really, we didn't really talk about it. Now, all of a sudden, when it feels that we're much more at odds with China, we're waking up. And you see the US government now saying we need to put money into this. Also, we have so much private capital in the United States. We have a lot of billionaires. We have lots of private money. And we need to focus on our private money on this as well. So what I would say is day to day, it's not something we wake up and say we're competing with China. We are really focused on these industries and making them resilient. And so far, we're feeling highly confident. Again, I'm not trying to say we have blinders on, and we're also focused on these core areas like energy, like health, like defense, that we're making sure that we're supporting the US government and our allies and these nations that we work in to move this stuff forward. And then the last thing I will say, back on the GCC in the Middle East, is this is why it's so critical for us to focus on them. The big thing I started hearing from them was, yeah, we're having more conversations with Russia and China because the US is not showing up. We've got to show up and have these conversations and these partnerships. So for me, I'm delighted every time we make a trip over there that we're having heads of state have these conversations, because the Middle East is such a critical component of the world. And if you think about how they're young, these nations are so young, and how much progress they've made in the short period of time, it's another reason they could beat China here soon, right? I mean, that's not impossible because they are moving so fast. Obviously, they don't have the same amount of people, but in terms of the innovation and what they could provide, and back to your point of being an extension of the US, I think we should lean into that. I think we should think about that more for all these reasons of power, energy, compute, the things that we can actually do together.
Thank you. By the way, so I'm going to ask Salman a question. I'm going to ask Mohammed a question. Then we're going to open up to the audience, including to our other folks who are calling in. So Salman, this is your last question from me. So looking outward, where do you see the most promising collaboration opportunities between Gulf institutions and US startups? Which elements of the GCC AI stack are most critical to making those partnerships scalable, trusted, and commercially viable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it comes back to kind of the crux of my motivation in these areas is like really, when you think about the infrastructure, if you have all the infrastructure in the world without the use cases to apply them and scale up and grow quickly, often becomes underutilized capacity in a way. And you think about areas of interest, like within healthcare, you can think about government sector also is very top of mind, that can be highly impactful in the region. These components allow for, call it, very impactful initiatives that drive impact for both patients. It could be at the government level, access, utilities. You think of, you can name any of these top of mind areas of interest. So that use case, the ability to make meaningful impact to society, is something that's very top of mind for me. And when you think about the speed to getting that done, is absolutely an opportunity. But that speed doesn't come without eliminating the barriers, which often can be fragmented frameworks on regulatory processes, the ability to understand what happens next. And so when you're thinking again from a building perspective, it's like, how do we short circuit that process? And then having folks in the room collaborating together thoughtfully to be like, all right, here's the established framework by industry. So healthcare, government, financial services, customer experience, whatever it may be. And so that foundation, I think it's gold, truly, and will be the foundational element of what can be created, and also create an ecosystem that fosters new innovation as well. So it's almost like creating a breeding ground for cultivating talent, both from a engineering, again, coming back to this curiosity concept, it's like, if you can get a handful of smart engineers in a room, give them free reign, like here are the guardrails that you must exist within, but everything else is creative license. You create really innovative things that we don't even think about today. So I would say exciting. So.
Yeah. Let me just come back to you real quick, Teresa, for one quick question first before I go to Mohammed. So this issue of fragmentation, and Patrick, you spent a lot of time in the region. You know these leaders. Are they accepting that message? I mean, there's a natural inclination for any national leader to sort of make sure, that his government is protecting what they've got. But do you think the message has penetrated that, fewer barriers and less fragmentation is better? And if they look at Europe, you could see the mistakes that have been made. Have you had those conversations, and how does that go?
For sure. I think they're getting the message. I mean, look, everybody always wants to be special. That's just, they want an unfair advantage for their countries, and we get that. However, they're also very clear, I think, that in order to be a leader in a region, that they have to do things together. And I was giving this example earlier. Alex over there on my team, he and I have been working with Bahrain and others on their regulatory process for digital currency and digital assets. And when you talk to the central bank CEOs, they all meet like once a month there. They have conversations, they work together, and they're thinking about how can we move money around, right? How do we make things easier? So I've seen that in other ways. I just had the privilege of working a lot with them. And there are, of course, things that they say, this is our thing. But overall, as a region, they get that they need to put their heads together. They need to figure out how they move further. And also, to your point, in Europe, they are really watching Europe closely. They brought that up to me numerous times, where they don't want to be pigeonholed into these different 27 like they've done. They talk about the 28th state, but they haven't gotten there. They don't want these regulatory barriers to stop growth and advancement of what they're trying to do in AI. My prediction is we'll see them even work more closely together to ensure that they have a successful region. Will they want some of their own things, and do they want to show up in their own special way? Absolutely. But when the rubber meets the road, I think they'll put their heads together and figure out how to move forward.
Thanks. So Mohammed, if the goal is to anchor the GCC AI stack within the US-led AI ecosystem, what does that policy roadmap look like? We've heard some ideas there, but what needs to happen on export controls in the United States, licensing, long-term partnerships to make that alignment durable and strategic?
Excellent question. Let me geolocate the Gulf within the global AI map that we're seeing unfolding right now. So again, using the compute narrative, the Europeans have about 10 to 12 gigawatt compute collectively as 27 states, which is a very sad reality, given the continent, given how rich it is, given also the energy abundance that supposedly some of our own European friends have. But they're no longer doing compute because Brussels has its own way of slowing things down, and this is the main complaint that you hear from everyone. So the Gulf rule in the AI ecosystem is the rule that Europe was supposed to be playing. If all these numbers came to fruition, we're speaking about almost equal level of compute in few countries in the Gulf, equal to the whole EU compute. That's massive, that's huge, because most of the new developments, most of the new infrastructure buildups that you are seeing, the announcements, it's all coming from the Gulf. So if this is the predicate, if this is the thesis, then we need to make sure that either we're building compute in the Gulf or not building compute in the Gulf. If we're building compute in the Gulf, that means we need to make sure that export controls are already in place, that we're able to allow this compute to happen in the Gulf. If we don't want to do that, then do not do announcements, do not do big celebrations and MOUs, because they don't really translate. If until today, all what we're seeing is few thousands of ships being exported, I think is really bad for business and really bad for the time constraint that we have. So we need to reform export controls. The idea that we're gonna be selling 35,000 chips every few months, that's not gonna cut it, and this is gonna be slowing down all these AI infrastructure partnerships that we have been announcing for the past year. The second thing, if we also want to anchor them truly in the United States, we also need to make sure that their capital is flowing inside the United States. That means we have to rethink about the CVS question. There are way smarter people than me here when it comes to CVS. CVS is a very complicated process. CVS is not an easy process. It has a lot of stakeholders within the US government. But if you want Gulf capital to be much more invested financially, even in the success of AI labs, and they're anchored in the success of American AI labs, you need to figure out a way to think about CVS with that framework. The third thing, and this is a much more serious recommendation, I would say, if we got the export control right, if we got the CVS process right, then the third thing, which is very important and very relevant, is if we cannot have gigawatts of compute capacity in the Gulf without allowing the Gulf to have chips production capacity onshore. There's nothing controversial about that, right? We know the situation in Taiwan. We know the situation in the South China Sea. We understand the tensions that exist in Asia. This is no longer a far-fetched situation. This is something that we are literally planning contingency for. And we do not need to, we're not thinking about TSMC. I'm not really saying TSMC, but we have India. We do have India, who is, now we have the Tata PSMC partnership to do 30,000 wafers a month in India. This is a country that's non-aligned, that's a swing state, that is, I would say, have a good relationship with Russia, and we're okay with that. If we're okay with India building a fab with PSMC, we should be okay with our own Gulf partners trying to bring something onshore, because we need to de-risk this sort of compute capacity that's going to be onshore in the Gulf. So those are my top 3 recommendations for how to make this partnership work.
Great points. Thanks. So this is a great discussion. Thank you so much for participation up to now, and open up for questions, and we'll start with you. And please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Cowley. I'm a global affairs journalist. I work for NBN. As the Gulf builds this AI infrastructure, does building more AI and to be more powerful automatically lead to better outcomes for people, for society? How do we measure that success? And if that's not the way to measure the success, if AI becomes more powerful, what should we be measuring instead?
So Salman, let me give you why don't you take the first lead on that since your company is doing that?
Yeah, great question. So the impact should be measured in terms of value provided to society specifically. So if you think like a lens of the patient side of things, oftentimes whether you're fighting incurable disease or trying to understand the patterns of care, a more powerful engine, let's say from an inference perspective, the ability to truly contextually understand what's happening can now happen at scale in a more longitudinal manner. So that's the direct output of utility, for example, from a patient perspective. And this is also true from like an allocation of resource perspective as well. So if you identify in a government ecosystem where opportunities to invest, now you can begin to process large amounts of data that historically you could understand. People always talk about big data, but in a practical sense, big data wasn't nearly as impactful. So think of like you take big data, but you give it an intelligent engine that has true utility, and that's how we measure success, broadly speaking. And that's kind of like the North Star, if you will, for all applied AI. So great question.
Anybody want to add to that before?
The only thing I think that's a really great question. And I think our outcomes should always be, we're doing this on behalf of making the world a better place. If we're not, we shouldn't be doing it. And we didn't get into that discussion up here, but each one of these modules that we talk about, each one of these areas of resilience, we should be measuring it on within healthcare. How is it making individuals healthier? How can we improve outcomes? When it comes to energy, is it making energy maybe less expensive and more accessible? I will just share, we talk about AI a lot, but if you look at the trends, the adoption is not where we want it to be. So we're still getting there, but I will share, like healthcare, of all of our companies, we have tons working in AI. There's so many great examples of where AI is helping health outcomes. Like it's, of everything I think of, and I look at how it's really changed the course of disease and diagnosis and therapeutics, it's probably the area in my mind that I look at our companies and I always go, wow, it's like amazing what AI is able to do. But we've got a lot of work to do. This is still early days, and that's a great question.
Yeah, please.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tyler Jess Thompson. I'm a co-founder of Expeditionary, which is an AI startup that provides support to large enterprise in complex negotiation. My question is that, so you already mentioned that the Gulf states are concerned about regulatory environments outside the region, even if they streamline their regional policies. Europe, as you mentioned, could potentially hamper it, the regulatory environments of where the companies are and where the users are. And you alluded to it briefly, but is the Gulf doing advocacy in places like Europe and the United States for this regulatory change? Or are they advocating, or are they advocating for regional principles for regulation, global principles for regulation? And sort of the logical offshoot of that is, are folks concerned about full-on tech silos, from whether from its global power competition or regulatory constraints, et cetera? I would just be interested to know what the Gulf's approach to advocating outside the region on policy is.
Mohammed, you've got that.
I mean, 3 years ago, when we had the GBT moment, clearly there was a gold rush try to regulate AI, and clearly our friends in EU took this to heart and rolled out their own anti-AI regulations. Clearly, again, I'm very biased when it comes to EU. But globally speaking, I think we have departed from that conversation. I don't believe that you have a clear push for a collective global AI governance structure. I don't believe that this is where we are. I think we are in a very, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, we're in a much more deployment-focused, deployment-first AI systems. You see how the focus on the AI side became two conversations taking place at the same time. AI infrastructure, this is why every announcement that you see is all about AI infrastructure partnership between OpenAI and virtually everyone in the market, virtually everyone globally. You're seeing the same thing also with other AI labs, Anthropic and xAI. The second thing is deployment of AI at scale. And like Teresa said, the adoption rate is not really as we have hoped for, specifically 3 years after GPT. So all these nations are working on upscaling, making sure that they have the talent, making sure that AI models are either domain specific for certain agencies, so you're able to utilize those models better, or you're trying to do a much more general AI systems deployment for citizens use. But on the idea of governance right now, listen, outside of United States and China, I think everyone else is just trying to figure out what role they can play. But clearly, those are the two countries that are pushing so hard on this front, and those are the two countries that are framing how we are thinking about AI deployment globally.
Great. You, and then you, Wow, and then I've got some questions from the calls.
Down here.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I'll do you, and then, yeah, well, and then you, Barbara. Please. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Greetings. My name is David Bray. Wear multiple hats. In this case, I'm with the Stimson Center as chair of the accelerator. You mentioned that one of the strengths of the Middle East is when they decide to do something, they move very quickly. And so while we've talked about tech and what can be done in infrastructure, is there a possible role where you could almost imagine sister city initiatives within the Middle East or with the United States, or even sister hospital initiatives where it's actually about implementation, where it's showing what's possible, not just talking about the infrastructure and AI, but actually doing it and doing it together as opposed to a sort of cylinders or isolation, and doing so with the US, but also within the Middle East as well?
I'll give you what we're doing. I love that question because that's exactly, and I think he's a great example in his company of trying to do these partnerships, but we are actually trying to bridge that. That's one of the conversations we're having is, can we take our health systems here in the US? Because look, if you think about it, they've launched Cleveland clinics. They're very, pro healthcare initiatives across the Gulf. So it's a natural place to actually try some of these things. If it's working in the US, can it work in the Gulf and vice versa? But that's really what we're doing. We're in talks, without saying too much, with different systems on, one, can we bring our companies over, our portfolio companies, and let them operate and try out some of their technologies and utilize. Some of our companies have already gotten contracts with health systems in the Gulf, and we're learning. But to your point, David, I think the learnings are going to be the important part. It's not just talking about it, but it's doing it and then sharing those learnings together.
Great, thanks. Wow.
Yeah, I'll just
Oh,
add a
sorry,
couple,
go ahead,
just a couple of
Solomon.
thoughts to that. Exactly right. It's like, it's interesting. So when you think about the evolution of the healthcare market broadly, and also evolution in the Gulf region, it's very exciting because there's opportunity, massive opportunity for growth as well. We're briefly speaking about this on the health plan side. It's like, as you're looking to orient more towards quality, outcomes, and impact, those variables are very data intensive. And doing that at scale early on, if you can set a foundation really well, then it creates a massive opportunity from the moment someone is born to the moment that they progress in their life and their, in some cases, disease state. You'll be able to understand those patterns in a comprehensive manner. And so I would say, broadly speaking, it presents a very exciting opportunity for those partnerships, and we're also actively in those conversations and designs, and we're very optimistic about the growth in the region. So
yeah, and I would just add too that when you talk to Emirati officials, explicitly they say, this is part of lifting all boats in the region. Mm-hmm. So they talk about benefiting not just the people of UAE, but people in other parts of the region that have not, that are struggling with other things or poverty and other things. So that's explicitly part of their policy, and I think implicitly also in Saudi and Qatari policy. But you know more about UAE policy than I do, Barbara. So you're up. Yeah.
Well, and actually, this relates a bit to the UAE. I just got back from 12 days in Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai, and the trajectory of this explosion, not just in AI, but in all of these domains using AI, is really extraordinary. And the change, the sort of the removal of every possible friction point in the ecosystem that would attract talent, allow talent to come, businesses to relocate, do medical testing that is simply not feasible in the United States in a timely fashion. All that said, what I'm also struck by is we didn't really touch on how the Congress is looking at this. I know this CHIPS sort of strangulation issue goes to internal divides in this administration over the security piece, among other things, just as they existed in the Biden administration, right? Well, I'm wondering how the Congress, what your view is on how the Congress is, first of all, educated in the issue or not, and looking at these issues, because our own electoral calendar is likely to bring, shall we say, adjustments across Congress, the White House over these next years. And Gulf states right now are getting a lot of bad raps about a lot of things. But I think this issue of the security piece can boomerang on them if this administration is not really taking a coherent approach. I'm getting a sort of directing rather than asking, but I'm wondering what your view is of this level of education and perspective in the Hill, Democrat and Republican.
I'll give you this is my view of doing this for a long time. We have always said, as you know, because I know you do this every day, you've got to be vigilant on the Hill, having these conversations every day with all the right people. And if you're not, it can backfire. And even if you do, it can still backfire, right? And everything you say is correct. We're potentially in changing times right now. So if the Gulf states are not in there having the conversations, along with companies like ours that actually say, look, here's why we think it's a good idea, how it could work. And we want to be able to, again, be collaborative and give them examples. And we found, just for us, just for the GC Institute, where we make the biggest impact is when we go in and talk to the lawmakers about how we're going to do it, why it matters, why they should consider it. And so the positive benefits, we literally, they get so many negatives. I tell my team all the time, I don't want to be problem brokers for them. I want to be solution brokers for them. So we actually do, when we go in, we try to explain why the benefit is there, because really for us, it's about growth, expansion, partnership. And we just think the Gulf is a good place for that. Like now, the U.S. politically has to make sure all their ducks in a row with all this, right? I get this. But in terms of the opportunity, if they can set up the parameters of this in the right way with these countries, it makes a lot of sense. For all the things you said first, how far ahead? They have the energy capacity. They're willing to bring talent in. They're willing to get ahead on some of these things that we're not always, but we can learn from the benefits of what they're doing in that partnership.
Great. Let me, well, did it's your turn, sorry.
Well, as a CEO of Engage and founder of Zenobia Advisory Group, I'm thinking here of the spoilers because that's what us poli-sci people do. And particularly I'm thinking of the Israelis who have for a few decades now thought themselves as the tech hub of the region. And how are they reacting to this? How have they signaled their position? And are the GCC countries engaging with them or with us on mitigating potential complications from them, whether on the Hill or directly? Because this would have geopolitical implications that in a way contributes to changing the balance of power in certain areas over the long term. It's profound, in fact.
I can't say, I don't know. Honestly, the answer is I don't know. I wish I did. We back a lot of Israeli companies. They're amazing. I've spent a lot of time in Israel over the years, and every time I'm in Israel, I'm like, wow, I'm always amazed at the talent and the collaboration and what they're building. So the answer is, I don't know the answer, but I would say, I hope they are. I hope they're working together and working to figure this out. But in terms of the talent and capacity, we see what Israel is, talent coming out of Israel. So, but I wish I had a better answer for you.
Mohammed, you want to comment?
Clearly, there's coordination, partnership that exist. Like, this is not new. I'm not breaking news to you. I was in the UAE, actually the same flight as Ambassador Leaf yesterday, and we discussed that. I mean, change is the new norm. The Gulf is rising. This is the Gulf moment. This is the region that's building the most exciting technology, and people have to understand that this is the new reality. So it's either they're going to build this with us or without us. That's basically the question I pose to people. When it comes to Israel, I mean, listen, it is a tech hub. NVIDIA is going to be announcing the new design center. It's an exciting market for a lot of people because of the talent, like Teresa said. They have also civilian military fusion that allows them to use a lot of the military talent in commercial aspects. This being said, I'm speaking about the AI infrastructure, it will be happening in the Gulf. How the United States is balancing this or figuring this out, I think clearly President Trump doesn't think that way. He thinks that he is friends with a lot of countries at the same time, and he's trying to decouple, or at least the way it looks to me from outside. I'm not going to be one of those guys who are trying to explain to you how President Trump thinks, because this is a very, very tough job. But clearly, at least his team is thinking about decoupling a lot of files at the same time. Think about India, Pakistan, think about his own May trip to the Gulf states. So he is more of, let's focus on whatever at hand and figure this out. That's, I think this is the way forward on this issue.
But, you know, I mean, look, the Abraham Accords are a major accelerator for this process. I mean, the Israelis don't have the energy, the space, the capital to create this capacity, but they certainly have the tech and the other capabilities to take advantage of it. So, and we see that traffic. I mean, this is part of the justification and the genius of the Abraham Accords, right? So I think that's what, that's how they would see it. And there's no, you know, and we all know the advantages and the obstacles to normalization with Saudi, and that's also going to be part of that equation. I've got to figure. So,
You know, the ambassador makes a really good point. You know, the problem is with Israel, you can't fight gravity in terms of space and capacity. They have to build some of this stuff. So I think their superpower, again, is back to the talent, how quickly they move, how agile they are in their thinking, and how they're going to be able to partner. So these will be the things that will really set them apart, because you just can't fight the space factor, if that makes sense, in terms of what they can actually produce.
Yeah. Let me add something on the capital, the
Yeah.
human capital part I did not touch upon. One of the things that I have been asked from a lot of stakeholders here in DC about the TAN gap in the Gulf. And for some reason, I never understood where this question is coming from, because I lived in Saudi Arabia, or at least I commuted between DC and Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for 2 years. My wife was based there. And what I can tell you is this is a very Silicon Valley model on steroids, right? Like when you go anywhere in the Gulf, we're speaking about very global talent concentrated over there that I would argue represent globalization at scale. When you go to Abu Dhabi, and we're just touring the M42 lab facility in Abu Dhabi, and look at the workforce. The workforce is South Asian, it's Arab, Emirati, English. I mean, that's a region that's, when it comes to talent, it was able to figure out an equation where they're able to attract a lot of talent coming from a very interesting market, where they're able to provide them with the space, the capital, the also working with other talented people from all around. So I think one of the things that I see their assets is the Gulf. This Gulf is really, really good at attracting top talent in every industry you can imagine. I think biotech and AI are two prime examples for this.
yeah. So listen, we're winding up. So there were some really good questions also from the callers. So let me drop these questions on the panel, and you guys can answer whichever ones you want, and then, or make any other closing comments as you may wish. But certainly whenever we talk about AI, we have to talk about the impact on the labor market, and will jobs be lost? Will industries be lost? And what's the particular take? I mean, we talk about it here in the United States. What's the take on that in the Gulf? Is that the same as here? Is it different? Is it, you know, so what's the GCC sort of angle on the impact of AI on jobs? And the other is, we talk about data centers, energy and land as attractions for data centers, but what about the demand on water resources? And is this a potential constraint or risk for the GCC tech stack? So Salman, let me start with you, and then we'll go through.
Yeah, I think the evolution in terms of jobs and roles, inherently jobs will be eliminated. That's just a reality of when you kind of streamline administrative components. But there'll be new areas of interest in jobs that will be created that will be more, call it, focused on like human thought and human perspective. And so when you think about some of these applied healthcare use cases, oftentimes a lot of folks are spending time administratively, you know, sorting through information, identifying patient patterns. But now imagine that you have all the patient patterns being identified, and now you can focus on empathy and experience, something that humans are well built and designed for, where AI shouldn't necessarily really be in. So that's kind of how I think about it. Of course, elimination will occur, but an evolution will also happen. And these would be different roles that were created on a more ongoing basis, is how I think about the paradigm. And I think that to be a global paradigm, I can't necessarily speak for the GCC region, but broadly speaking, I'm optimistic on this particular area as well. And then there'll be some growing pains for sure. But by and large, it should create more abundance, as our team often says, and opportunity, I believe.
Thanks.
I agree. I don't have a lot to add, except I will say something I've seen in the UAE that I think is really interesting. If you look at their plan, their country plan around AI, they actually say they're going to start doing education at the elementary level. So they have a plan. I've not seen any other country do that. And they talk about the workforce. So they are already preparing. So they, again, I'll go back to their leading, not lagging in this area, which I think is important. And also, there's just things we don't know about workforce. That is the reality. We're learning. I mean, again, I would say we're flying this airplane while we're building it again. We are learning every day. And when you talk to our founders, they'll actually say, we need people. Like right now, most founders like, we're not using less people. But if you go talk to Microsoft or Salesforce or Amazon or Google, they will tell you, Andy Jassy I think he said 60% of all their coding is already being done by AI. I don't know how I feel about that. I want to make sure they're watching it. I mean, just like I've seen coding, you still need humans to pay attention to that coding. So there's a lot of human. So I think we've got a lot of learning still on the workforce and what's actually going to happen.
Yeah, and then it's a very different demographic in the Gulf, right? I mean, family sizes are different. There's a youth bulge moving through. So it could be that in 30 years, they'll need AI to do some of these jobs because there won't be other people to do them.
That's right.
And there's obviously dependence in the Gulf on immigration. We talked about some of that high-level professional immigration, but also for labor. So how would AI impact that? So there's some really unique GCC questions around this.
I think you're making such a good point because their demographic is different. You can't really compare it to anybody else, and how they're gonna. It'll be interesting as we watch it move.
Okay, our author, last words.
Nothing I can add to those two excellent answers.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you all so much. I'd love to keep you another 30 minutes. This is really a fun conversation. Soliman, it's really great to have you for your first time here at MEI. Hopefully this will be the first of many visits. And as I said, Teresa, thank you for your friendship and partnership, and look forward to having you many, many times. And congratulations, Mohammed, on a great paper.
I mean, thank you.